Did you ever, Jaden, did you feel the pressures?
You know, yeah, I did. Once I went out into the world and I saw what people, how people feel about my parents, I didn't understand, I'm still understand more and more every day.
2010 to 2012, I had achieved everything that I had ever dreamed. I was beyond the wildest dreams. I had been blessed beyond anything I can imagine. But nobody in my family was.
For years, Will Smith was seen as one of the safest investments in Hollywood, the untouchable one. He openly spoke about raising his kids differently, like he'd cracked some next-level parenting code the rest of the industry hadn't figured out. But as Jaden Smith got older, that polished image, it started.
What is your worst nightmare?
My worst nightmare. I don't have nightmares.
I'd probably say his worst nightmare.
No. She was asking individually. Your worst nightmare and my worst nightmare. You don't get to tell people my worst nightmare.
Okay.
How could you know, Jaden?
This isn't about blaming Jaden. That's not the point. It's about recognizing how his journey quietly peeled back layers of Will that maybe were never supposed to be exposed.
All right, sit down. Stand up.
Okay, I'm really confused by the direction.
I'm the director. Do what I say.
Okay.
Wait, who did his wardrobe?
My pants used to be together.
This is important for Just.
I feel like this is more of a striped shirt thing.
Did somebody bring some clothes for Jaden?
For decades, Will Smith carried one of the cleanest reputations in Hollywood. Even critics who weren't fans of his films still respected how he avoided real controversy. That's why the lawsuit from Brian Scott Joseph landed differently. It didn't feel like gossip blog noise. It came with specifics, dates, details, structured claims, the kind that make people stop and really listen. Brian Scott Joseph, a professional violinist and former contestant on America's Got Talent, says he was brought on to collaborate with Will for a tour project. At first, everything appeared professional, standard, routine. But according to the lawsuit, things gradually shifted. Joseph claims the tone became more personal, emotional language that didn't feel strictly business. He describes feeling subtle pressure to stay close, stay loyal, and avoid questioning certain dynamics. The filing outlines what he portrays as a power imbalance, where access and influence allegedly blurred professional boundaries. Believe it or not, the wording is what stood out. This wasn't framed as confusion. It was framed as intention. And then came the hotel incident. Joseph alleges that during the tour, someone entered his room without permission. When he returned, he says there was a handwritten note waiting. The message implied someone planned to come back and hang around. He says it didn't feel friendly. It felt unsettling. What made people uneasy wasn't just the note. It was the context, the atmosphere around it. According to Joseph, when he raised concerns with management, they were brushed aside. He claims he was made to feel like he was overreacting. Soon after, he was removed from the tour entirely. Will's legal team strongly denied every...
Jaguar Wright had already been making explosive claims about multiple industry names, and Will Smith was one of them. She alleged that his mentorship initiatives sometimes operated as a cover for inappropriate relationships with men, and she didn't limit her commentary to adults. She brought up Jaden Smith. When talking about potential long-term emotional damage, at first her statements were easy to brush off, hard to prove, easy to label as noise. But once the lawsuit surfaced, people began revisiting what she'd said and connecting dots they hadn't before. Then another voice entered the picture. Brother Bilal, described as a longtime friend of Will, he claimed that years earlier, he walked in on Will in a compromising situation with another actor. He also alleged that something serious involving Jaden led to him leaving the family home at a young age.
This is unlike him, right? So I open the door to Dwayne's dressing room, and that's when I see Dwayne and having anal with Will. There was a couch, and Will was bent over on the couch, and Dwayne was standing up, killing him. Murder, like murder. There was murder in there.
After those stories started circulating, viewers went back to old footage with a completely different lens. There are multiple interviews where Will Smith kisses Jaden directly on the lips.
You're not looking to kiss my son. I can kiss my son. Jaden, come on.
No!
Are you okay? Are you okay?
Oh my God!
At the time, most people dismissed it as an overly affectionate father being playful. But revisiting those clips, some noticed Jaden's body language more closely. The tight smile, the stiff posture, the split-second delay before reacting. It didn't look relaxed, it looked uncertain. And it wasn't just one moment. It was several, spanning years in different interviews. That's when the conversation shifted. Were those interactions purely affectionate? Or were they about controlling how their bond appeared to the public?
You know I love him, Ellen. I love him.
What makes those clips significant is that they weren't private family moments. They happened on camera, in front of audiences. Jaden didn't control the framing, the world saw it exactly as it was presented. And once footage like that circulates, it never really disappears. When a child grows up without ownership of their own image, boundaries can get blurred. If visible discomfort is laughed off, you learn quickly that your feelings aren't the priority. Over time, that kind of dynamic can shape how someone reclaims control. By the time Jaden Smith reached his late teens, the public had already labeled him as different. His fashion, interviews, music, it all felt intentionally unpredictable. But the moment that cemented that narrative came through how he spoke about Tyler. The creator. For some, it looked like bold honesty. For others, it felt complicated. Not because of who he mentioned, but because of how publicly and one-sidedly it was delivered. The attention shifted from identity to intent. Why announce it like that? That question became unavoidable at Camp Flog Gnaw in 2018. During a high-energy set in front of thousands, Jaden grabbed the mic and declared that Tyler, the creator, was his boyfriend. The crowd erupted. The clip went viral instantly. From that point forward, Jaden's public persona began to feel less like exploration and more like armor. If he stayed unpredictable, nobody could box him in. And to understand why Jaden Smith leaned into that reaction, you have to rewind to the moment trust started cracking. In 2013, Will Smith released After Earth. This wasn't just another project, it was Will's vision from start to finish. He publicly framed it as a symbolic handoff, a father passing the torch to his son. In his mind, it was the ultimate launchpad, but Jaden was only 14. That detail gets skipped over, especially when you're talking about a film with a massive budget. Reportedly around $130 million pushed on a global scale. The pressure wasn't just about acting, it was about proving his father right, proving he deserved the spotlight. Jaden later explained that his parents prepared him early for public expectations, that people would compare him, question him, and measure him against what they had already accomplished. So he knew the wait was coming. But when After Earth dropped, everything shifted. The reviews weren't just negative, they were brutal. The word embarrassing started circulating, and Jaden didn't get shielded from that. He became the focal point of the backlash. For a teenager raised being told he was extraordinary, that kind of public humiliation hits differently. Not long after the film's release, Jaden asked for emancipation. Legal independence. That wasn't some dramatic phase. That was paperwork. That was serious. A child requesting separation from the very people meant to guide and protect him. Will later admitted the request shattered him. But what stands out is how Jaden reportedly felt. Misled. Exposed. Like the dream wasn't fully his. Like ambition may have outweighed protection. That's where something fundamental shifted. Jaden stopped viewing acting as a doorway and started seeing it as a setup. The industry didn't feel empowering anymore, it felt confining. So instead of playing the game, he stepped sideways. He abandoned the traditional path and crafted an identity that rejected expectations altogether. Subtly, unpredictability became strategy. And as that evolution unfolded, Jada Pinkett Smith and Will doubled down on the parenting philosophy. They had always defended the idea that strict rules were restrictive, that freedom was the answer. They believed punishment did more damage than good. Instead of discipline, it was dialogue. Instead of structure, it was autonomy. Giving their kids major life control at an age when most teens are still asking for permission slips. On paper, it sounded progressive. But when fame and wealth erase normal consequences, that much freedom can morph into something else entirely. Will Smith later admitted they made what he called a terrible mistake. By leaning into radical honesty in a no-punishment household. The idea was transparency over authority. But eventually, he acknowledged it didn't land the way he imagined. He realized maybe too late that boundaries aren't about control. They're about protection. Kids need limits not because they're bad, but because they're still figuring the world out. Without guardrails, even responsibility starts to feel optional. For Jaden Smith, that freedom arrived early and all at once. He wasn't just offered choices, he was handed adult-level autonomy without adult-level stability. When lines blur between right and wrong, conversation alone doesn't always anchor you. And talk can't replace structure when a teenager is overwhelmed. Education is where this shift became visible. Jaden stepped away from traditional schooling. No standard classrooms, no routine testing, no daily peer interaction. His parents believed conventional systems were limiting, even damaging. Jaden absorbed that philosophy and amplified it. He began posting anti-school messages online, arguing that education systems brainwashed students and suggesting society would be better off if people opted out. That wasn't quiet skepticism, that was full rejection. The issue wasn't curiosity. Curiosity is healthy. The issue is isolation. School isn't just about facts. It's about friction, disagreement, being corrected, learning how to exist around people who challenge you. Without that pushback, ideas can grow unchecked. And over time, they can create confidence without foundation. Public interviews started highlighting the disconnect. Jaden would speak about time bending, energy shifting, concepts that sounded profound at first until you examined them closely. Without resistance growing up, criticism later in life doesn't feel constructive. It feels hostile. When you've rarely heard no, the first real one can sound like betrayal. Fashion became another pressure point. Jaden began wearing skirts and embracing gender-fluid styles, and instantly it dominated headlines. Some celebrated him as fearless, others mocked him relentlessly. Overnight, it turned into a cultural flashpoint. Will admitted that phase frightened him as a father, but he chose to stay hands-off. The problem? The public doesn't operate on parenting theories. The internet isn't patient. Jaden absorbed the backlash largely on his own, and the same environment that protected him from boundaries didn't fully protect him from the consequences once the world pushed back from judgment. He had to absorb millions of opinions without necessarily having the emotional tools to filter them. What looked like unlimited freedom publicly could have felt a lot like being left alone privately. Inside the Smith household, pressure didn't come from just one direction. Some of it traced back to wounds that were never fully resolved. One of the biggest lingering shadows was Tupac Shakur. Jada Pinkett Smith has always spoken openly about her bond with Tupac. It wasn't hidden, it was something she honored. That connection didn't exist in a vacuum. It shaped the emotional climate of the family. At one point, Will Smith admitted he felt jealous. He said it created insecurity, that he never felt like he could compete with the history they shared. And tension between adults rarely stays invisible. Kids feel it even when nobody explains it. There was a moment that unsettled a lot of people, when it became public that Willow Smith as a child had written a letter to Tupac asking him to come back because her mother was sad. The letter wasn't meant for the world, but once it surfaced, it sparked questions. Not about blame, about emotional weight. Willow's own journey with fame added another layer. She faced pressure most children never encounter. Eventually, she stepped away from touring at a young age, saying she was done. That decision alone hinted at how heavy things had become. By the time Jaden Smith entered his mid-20s, the confusion surrounding him didn't feel experimental anymore. It felt exhausting. One of the clearest examples surfaced during Paris Fashion Week. Jaden appeared in looks that demanded attention, in one instance with his face fully painted, in others styled in ways that felt intentionally jarring. And high fashion isn't easy to shock. Standing out there takes intention. He made sure he stood out. But instead of thoughtful critique, most of the reaction was ridicule. The conversation wasn't about artistry. It was about comparison. Why can't he just be normal? Why doesn't he act more like his father? That comparison follows him everywhere. In a later interview, Jaden said something that stopped people in their tracks. He expressed hope that future psychologists would study him, that they'd look back and try to understand what was wrong with him. That wasn't said casually. It revealed awareness. He knows people view him as unstable or broken. What stood out wasn't self-pity. It was distance. He didn't frame himself as someone healing. He framed himself as a subject. A case study. When you grow up constantly observed, it becomes easy to feel more analyzed than understood.
In that same conversation, he admitted that many people approach him just to discuss his father. Not his projects, not his creativity, just Will Smith. Over time, that erodes identity. It's hard to feel like your own person when every introduction comes with someone else's name attached. From the outside, it doesn't look like isolation. He's wealthy, famous, surrounded by people. But real isolation isn't about being alone. It's about not being recognized for who you actually are. Every attempt Jaden makes to separate himself seems to circle back to comparison. If he tones it down, critics say he's wasting opportunity. If he pushes boundaries, they say he's embarrassing the family. There's no comfortable middle. At some point, the experimentation stops feeling rebellious. It starts feeling protective. If the world is going to laugh regardless, you might as well decide what the joke is. And that's what Jaden appears to be doing now, turning unpredictability into protection. Doing now, music. The parenting choices Will Smith made are etched into every part of his son's life. What was intended as freedom often became confusion. This isn't a tale of teenage rebellion or chasing attention. It's a story about consequences, the kind that take years to fully surface. So what do you think? Did Jaden stumble because he wasn't ready? Or was he given too much autonomy too soon? Did Will Smith guide his son wisely? Or did he lose control of the process entirely?